Hi everyone, I'm Alice and I'll kick off tonight by talking about UX research with K-8 students, and I'll walk through an example with a co-design workshop case study. So yeah, I'm Alice. I have always worked in UXR in the EdTech space. So I really love amplifying the voices of K-8 students and educators for EdTech. My heart really belongs to the students, and I think it's super nice to get videos of students and having kind of students' voices really make sure that they're the ones who are inputting for a system that's serving them. And I'm currently a senior user experience researcher at Curriculum Associates. My background, tech at MIT and education at Harvard. So researching with students is not all that different from UX research process in general. So starting off with identifying research questions and selecting your research method, moving on to recruiting students, which has some of its own challenges, creating the protocol, connecting the research, and then finally analyzing patterns and presenting results. So I'll go through each of these steps and call out kind of the specific nuances when we're working with K-8 students. All right, so step one, identifying research questions. I think this is pretty standard for UX research in general. It really involves working with teams to prioritize those research questions. And I like to do this through an urgency and importance matrix. And sometimes when there are a ton of research questions, I like to conduct dot voting to help determine those priorities. And something that we'll loop back into later in step 5 is when we're presenting actionable results. And something that I like to think about at this stage in step 1 is to really think about, okay, there's all these questions that the team wants to learn about. What are the ones that are truly something that we can take action on? What are the answers that can inform our next steps in the design process? So this is just a quick example of what this process looked like in this co-design workshop. We had a bunch of student-related research questions, a bunch of teacher-related student questions. We conducted a dot voting to determine, I don't know, top 10-ish. And then we pulled down in this importance and urgent matrix, kind of the top 3 questions for each of those. And this co-design workshop was a result of some of those student-related research questions. So as an example, one of the research questions that floated up to the top here for this particular project was, how do students feel about seeing their performance compared to their peers? So this was really tough to get to this fidelity. I think in the beginning, teams were like, what does social mean for middle schoolers? How do we really meet that developmental need? So drilling it down to this level really helps to determine what we might show to students, what we might ask students. So really being kind of as specific as possible here. And then once we have our research question determined, we can select our research method. So in this case, we ended up on a co-design workshop for a couple of different reasons. First off, this project was in its exploratory stages, and the team was really curious and hungry for discovery research. You know, who are middle schoolers, kind of at a very broad level. And one thing that I've been pushing for and thinking about a lot is how we can include student voices as early as possible in projects. So at this early stage, we can really have student voices inform the product direction and not necessarily just, usability testing at the end, a quick validation before kind of launching. Including students this early, kind of before we even have a design direction or product direction, really helps make sure that their voices are there at the beginning, and we can really act on those insights we glean from students. And then especially for middle schoolers in this project, they know best what's cool for them. We adults can sit around and think about it all day, but kids have a totally different idea of what's cool. So definitely helpful to have students ideate at this process. All right, so step 2, you need to recruit your students. So again, some things that are pretty similar to a general UX research project, determining your target audience, making sure that we have a clear screener criteria with the team. But in this case, we really are thinking about creating partnerships with schools or after school or extracurricular organizations where those students already are. And this process, maybe not surprisingly to some, is sometimes the hardest part of the work, really finding and identifying schools or other partners that are willing to give us the time and space and see the value in having students really be present in the EdTech design process is super critical. And of course, during a pandemic makes it even harder. So we were able to partner up with a community-based organization in Alabama, specifically in Birmingham, and they are an extracurricular program. And so we were able to work with this program whose mission is to mentor and work with young Black boys with single parent households. And so we were able to work with this organization and really bring their voices to the forefront. The director was super awesome, and he really bought into, why this work is important and really saw the value of also exposing his scholars to what design thinking is and potentially exposing a career path for them. So that was something that they were really excited about. And it's been a really great partnership to work with them. So step 3, creating the protocol. So I think typically for user research, we want to make sure that, the typical things on not leading questions, no double-barreled questions, direct, but also broad enough. But in this case, really making sure that they are age appropriate, depending, obviously a K student and an 8th grader would have very different questions that we might ask them, and making them as direct as possible. We found that sometimes the typical really broad or why or open-ended questions, kids get pretty tripped up over and kind of are confused about what you're really trying to ask. So trying to make those questions as direct as possible. And I think something that I've really noticed is that students, typically when adults are asking students questions, there's a right answer. And so they feel like they're trying to answer that right question and, please you as an adult. So making sure paying special attention to wording those questions. So it really is, I'm curious about this, I'm wondering about this, and they don't feel like there is a right answer that they're trying to answer. So this is kind of just a snippet of a protocol for the co-design workshop. So we kind of established some brainstorming rules. We talked about what a design critique was. They were given the role of art director to kind of give us feedback on these screens. And then some very direct, simple questions. There were a couple of different features. So I didn't copy and paste all of them, but for this feature, kind of what's working, what's not working, and what would make it better. So really direct, really simple things that they were excited to answer and know that there wasn't a right answer there. All right, so step 4, conducting research. So again, with kiddos, something that is really critical here is creating a safe space where power dynamics are de-emphasized. Again, kids usually when they're working with adults is either a teacher or a parent or someone in their household, and there's definitely a power dynamic of I should be listening to you or I should be doing something to please you. And so really creating that safe space is really critical. And we like to spend a lot of time developing rapport at the beginning, doing some icebreakers, being silly with kids, and making sure to kind of break that ice. So this was an example of an activity that we did with middle schoolers around that social question again. And so we played a game of Kahoot based on the design thinking principles we had previously learned about in the co-design workshop. So this was, I think it was session 4 out of 6, and they were weekly sessions. And then they reviewed kind of the 3 sessions of content that we'd already talked about around design thinking, along with some silly things like, I think we said like, what flavor ice cream was, Mike's favorite or whatever that was. And so a fun game. They loved Kahoot. And then afterwards, we kind of showed the scoreboard at the end of Kahoot and talked and asked about how they felt seeing how you compared against your peers. And so we were able to kind of have that experience, that fun experience together, and then dig deep into one screen or one feature of this particular product, Kahoot, and kind of understand those thoughts and bring those insights into iReady. All right, and then finally, analyzing patterns and presenting. So we were doing the co-design workshops on Thursday evenings, and I would send out end of day insights Friday at noon, pull a meeting together and quickly kind of go through what happened Thursday night. And especially with kiddos, even more true for students than adults, is really paying special attention to their body language and their behaviors and that aren't immediately obvious, and maybe the tone that they're saying certain things matter a lot here too. And then, as I promised, kind of circling back to making sure that these are actual insights that we're presenting to the team, and making sure that there's a clear way forward and what we can do to address maybe some of the opportunities that we've unearthed. All right, so I don't know how I'm doing on time, but feel free to ask some questions in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. And unfortunately, I'm not able to make it to the Q&A after, but feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's just Alice Hype, and ask me any questions there as well.
Awesome, thanks, Alice. So we have about 4 minutes or so for questions. So if folks want to start putting them into the chat, feel free to start doing that. And Alice, you could probably see the chat, so I can read them out loud. Maybe we'll do that, and then we'll do it that way.
Sure.
So one question from Judy is, did kids get compensated in any way?
Yeah, so this is something that we've iterated on a couple times. When we were in person, pre-pandemic, when we were going into schools, we mainly compensated the school partnership site, and since they were kind of doing the work of arranging the meetings or the spaces that we were able to pull students. But in this case, since it was virtual and kids were expected to log on their own, we did compensate kids, and we did it kind of one payment halfway through, so 3 sessions in, and then 1 payment at the end, so that way they were motivated to keep coming. And attendance was definitely an issue too, so that was part of the solution for that.
Awesome, thanks. Next one's a 2-parter. I'll read the first one first. So any issues with privacy when working with students?
Yeah, that's a huge one. One thing, we always make sure to get our consent forms from their parents, and that's something that we work with schools with as well. And we have a lot of kind of policies in place to make sure that we're not collecting PII. Besides, now that we're virtual, the recording, of course, is there, but otherwise, when we're talking about students, we always talk about P1, label them not by their name, and we don't collect any information around, how they're doing or what type of student they are. We ask, whenever possible, we ask the school or the partner site to help us recruit for a certain criteria or whatever that looks like.
Awesome. And then the second part to Kara's question is, how did you select the organization that you worked with?
Yeah, so currently we are just kind of excited to partner with anyone. So if any teachers on the call, if you all are excited to work with us, that's definitely something we're always looking for. So for UX research, there's really not a strong criteria. Like, it just depends on what projects we have, and we have KU projects happening all the time. So it's really just school or any organization that is willing to have us come in and visit with kids. And, we typically they're like 10-minute sessions when it's a smaller usability testing. And so whatever organization is happy to work with us, we're always happy to do that. And we, just kind of like events like this, making an all-call, networking with teachers and making sure, and internally, since we are such a huge company, kind of working with sales folks and identifying potential sites that might be good for us as well.
Cool, awesome. We got 1 more minute and there are 2 questions. So pace yourself, I guess, or try. The first one is, did you collect any demographic information? And if you can share anything about that. So that's the first one.
We typically don't collect demographic information for students. We do for teachers in the screener survey. We ask them to fill out some demographic information, but we don't for students. It's, again, part of the PII and not wanting to have any information on hand that we don't need.
Great, thanks. And then the last question is, when you're trying to figure out key objectives, research questions, who was involved in that workshop, for example, cross-functional members or anything like that?
Yeah. So the way that this project is organized is slightly different since it's a pretty broad subject. So I'd say like everyone was there, from the VPs to product managers, designers, editorial folks, which is kind of the instructional designer equivalent at CA. Everyone. I think the meeting must have been like 20 people-ish. But typically when it's a usability test or something that's a little bit smaller in scope, I would say it's usually just the product manager and designer.
Awesome. All right, Alice, thank you so much for your time and thanks for that presentation. And if folks want to connect, feel free to connect with Alice on LinkedIn. Thanks again.
Oh, and one last plug, we are hiring a lead UX researcher. So I can pop this link in the chat in a moment, but we're hiring and expanding our team. So keep an eye out on that job board that Jeff shared earlier, and would love to work with one of you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alice. Next, we're going to turn it over to Kelly. So Kelly, as you're ready, feel free to share your screen. And then, when you're ready, just go for it.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm hoping that folks can see my screen and can hear me okay. Perfect. So hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Martin. My pronouns are she, hers. And I'm a senior product designer at Panorama Education right now. I've been in the product design space for maybe 5 or so years. And before that, I was actually working in education at an education nonprofit right here in Boston called City or Boston. So education has really always been my passion since then, and I'm really excited that I now get to design in the EdTech space. So today I'm going to be talking about my experience over the last 9 or so months working on a product discovery and design project in the SEL space, or social emotional learning space, in K-12 education for Panorama. And as a quick note, this is an ongoing project. This hasn't been yet released, so some of the specifics are still confidential, but it's meant to be a high-level look at our process, the challenges, and things that I've learned so far. So social emotional learning skills, or SEL skills, are really critical to school, career, and life success, and are becoming more and more talked about today, especially amid the pandemic and all the challenges that have come with that. And so just an overview, Panorama Education offers tools that help school districts assess and measure and support each student's social emotional learning skills. And these skills are things like growth mindset, self-efficacy, social awareness, self-management, and so on. So our products right now offer research-backed surveys. We also have tools that allow districts to give more frequent check-ins to elevate student voice. And we also have SEL reporting, which helps users review and analyze their SEL data in order to find opportunities for growth and to celebrate successes and set goals. So for this project, it kind of started about a year ago. In January 2021 is when I became involved. And I had the opportunity to be a part of this larger product and design discovery project in the SEL space. And at the time, we actually didn't have a squad or a team of engineers who were waiting for designs like a typical team or squad would normally be working. And so it allowed us to be really highly focused and intentional on thinking about what the next generation of our SEL product was going to look like. And this could be grounded in district needs and user needs and a number of other, of course, important criteria that you need to keep in mind when you're making product decisions. So the purpose of this research was really to sketch out what that path was going to be in terms of our SEL vision and sort of multi-year product development strategy. And I was working closely with our head of product and our head of research. This is a overview of what 9 months of work looks like boiled down into one slide. And well, more than 9 months, because as you'll notice in the first column there, the discovery piece is something that we've been building up at Panorama for a long time. But and these are also really design specific, so things that I was heavily involved in, but our head of product was also leading an ROI analysis and sizing with engineering, consultation with strategic finance, et cetera. But as you can see, over the last 4 or so quarters, we've been going through this process, starting with discovery. So that looked like literature reviews, research analysis, internal workshops, competitive analysis, and early brainstorming. And then that brainstorming really turned into more formal concepts, ideation and validation. So we sent out surveys. I'll talk more about that in just a second. And again, led interviews and had leadership team and alignment on our concept ideas. And now in Q2, we're beginning to refine that product vision. And now we're moving into the wireframing and testing phase of things. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics here. And we also, in all of this work, had a deep partnership with our teaching and learning team, which has been really crucial. They're really experts on training our clients, on fielding questions from educators, offering strategic planning and consulting services. So they've been really invaluable to work with and understanding the SEL landscape, our users' pain points, best practices in the world of SEL, implementation within a district, and so forth. So we, based on all of this research and these conversations in the beginning, we began to map out sort of a framework for how we think about social emotional learning in a district. So systemic SEL is sort of this switch from looking at students to looking at systems. So it's the classic sort of like, we're trying to shift from fixing students to fixing systems, which is really important to creating more equitable environments in schools for students as well. So systemic SEL is a year-round effort to support students' SEL. It's focused on building processes and systems to do so, and recognizing the importance of fostering a positive and equitable learning environment for all students. And we know, based on our research, that a lot of districts are overwhelmed by doing SEL on top of all of the other priorities that they have, and need help scaffolding their efforts and implementation. And so through our work, our interviews, literature reviews, partnerships with TNL, teaching and learning, and our client success teams, we've created this framework. This is sort of an early draft of it, but it shows how supporting students' SEL is systemically implemented across a district. So you can see there are levels here from the individual student level up to the community level, and a flow, almost like a user flow that you might move through in this implementation, from setting a vision, measuring student SEL, analyzing that data, deciding what changes to make in your universal and targeted programming, and then evaluating those changes. And so we use this to take a look at where we as a company were already filling some of these, supporting some of these areas in this cycle, but then also we use this to think about where we can grow. So based on the framework and our research, my team did some divergent brainstorming and some concept refinement, and we eventually got to these 8 product concepts that build off of our current product offering. And so layering these concepts into their respective places on this map here helped us understand like where they fit in terms of the whole implementation cycle. And after this, we needed to begin validating and prioritizing these ideas, because 8 product concepts is like 7 too many, really, to start working on a project. So we sent out, and one part of the process to validate is sending out surveys. The first one was gathering internal feedback. So we sent out a survey, heard from 32 Panorama employees in 9 departments, and we first asked respondents to rank the importance of 10 criteria when choosing a new SEL product to pursue. And then we asked respondents to rank all of the concepts based on those criteria. So I have some of those listed here, like how does this concept positively impact students, advance educational equity, solve a key problem for clients, etc. We also sent out a survey externally. So this survey went out to educators, and we heard from 568 educators in 48 states. And you can see a little bit of the breakdown of demographics as well as role. So hearing from a really diverse group, counselors, teachers, district admins, school leaders, etc. And similarly, we asked respondents to rank the importance of all of the concepts, which we framed as practices, since they, of course, aren't in the same like product framework as we are. But we asked them to rank them on similar scales. So how they support students' social emotional learning, advance educational equity, etc. And based on all of that data, we had a lot to look at, which was really great, and to help us understand where to go next. So this, for example, shows how our team ranks some of the different criteria of what we value in a product. And then this slide also is from our internal survey, and it shows how our team responded to sort of how promising each concept was, with the black vertical line representing a mean rating, and the blue lines representing an aggregate score based on those 10 criteria. So this is where our head of research came in and helped us understand all of the data that we got. But this information, along with the other research and other factors like interviews and our lit reviews, helped us to choose 2 final concepts to begin moving forward. So this is when we start to engage in work that's much more familiar to us as UX and product designers on the call. So this includes creating artifacts such as a journey map, identifying our key personas, requirement gathering, having early conversations with engineers, and so on. And just as a note, the screenshots here are just examples. They're not the actual artifacts. And again, just for confidentiality reasons. And this actually brings us to about where we are today. So I'm currently working on design options for one of our concepts in the form of wireframes, and they're being internally tested in an iterative process. And next, we're going to be setting up interviews with key users, as well as forming a design partnership with at least one, hopefully multiple clients, in order to receive more frequent feedback. And the design partnership is a model that we've used in the past at Panorama that we really love. It's essentially a relationship that we create with a school district, usually a school district who is eager to give us feedback in a particular area. And it just allows us to have regular intervals of feedback with a client. And as many of you know, generally, it's, as was mentioned earlier, like getting folks to be available for interviews, especially in the education space, can be really tough. So having a designated feedback partner, allows us to like have essentially somebody there all the time to be able to chat with, as well as, of course, always, if we can, reaching out to other clients so that we're not just hearing from one voice all the time or a group of voices. But it's a really helpful tool that we have. And this work moving forward is going to most likely be broken into 1 or 2 or maybe more teams. And we call those teams squads at Panorama. And that's going to look like a more traditional group of engineers, a designer, a PM, in order to finally be working on this work after months and months of planning it. And will be piloted with a limited number of clients to start, hopefully in 2022. So I want to talk really quickly about sort of challenges and lessons learned from all of this so far. As you know, I'm in the middle of it right now, but some challenges designing in EdTech. One big thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is this idea of designing for one versus designing for all. So something with our product is that it's used by a lot of people within a school district, everyone from a school administrator, school leader, sometimes administrators in education at the state level, counselors, teachers, so when we're talking about design, it's often really challenging to figure out who the specific users are that we have in mind. And of course, that's really important, really crucial to making a strong design is knowing who your key users are. So something that was just really important to me when doing this really high level product design project, which was new to me. I'm much more used to designing on a smaller feature level or a smaller project, is to just keep in mind who are we really defining as the primary, secondary, and tertiary user, because it's so important in helping us in the future make our design decisions, product decisions, and prioritization. The next thing, I've labeled it as the way things are versus the way things could be. And what I mean by this is that us as working in tech, as the design team, right, we're not in the classroom every day. And so what that inherently means is that we're really out of touch with the realities of what it is to work in a school building and to work in a school district day in and day out. And so it's important and really challenging to keep this at the core of our work. We can sit all day in a room, in a Zoom room with other folks in tech and ideate and theorize and envision what a product could be like and how it's going to change education. And then we need to be able to take that back into the realities of what's going on in the classroom. What are the time constraints? And so that balance can be really hard. And of course, the answer here is just as much research as possible, test as much as possible, always be in touch with your users. And if you can, get your thing out into the actual environment that it's going to be in, to make sure that you're set up for success. And then finally on here, I have making the shift from Six Flags to Disney World. And I'll try to explain this one quick. So many of you maybe have heard this analogy before, but essentially, when you think about Six Flags, you're thinking about the Six Flags park has sort of these discrete activities. It's essentially Six Flags is all about the rides. You go to Six Flags to ride the rides. In contrast, when you go to Disney, it's all about this experience. It's an entire experience from before you get to the park till after you're gone. And so when we're talking about designing in EdTech, we really need to think about that designing of experiences. And what that essentially means is that you're designing for not just these activities, but you're also designing for the gaps in between those activities and keeping in mind the whole flow of how you're going to enter into an experience. And so traditionally, we've designed SEL products and services. We're really focused on discrete activities, SEL measurement, SEL reporting, et cetera. And this project has really helped us think about how do we shift to designing a more holistic system for a social emotional learning implementation experience at a school district, where we research and design for the time that also happens between those discrete activities. And so we look for opportunities to connect activities into more continuous of a user flow, from measurement to reporting, to understanding that reporting, to taking action, to progress monitoring on that action, and so on. And then, wrong way, last quick thing, some things that I've learned. I'll go over these really quick because they're, the lessons you learn them over and over again, and they're all, always so relatable. So the value of long-term discovery processes and how design can be involved. This project really came from the fact that we didn't have a squad of engineers waiting for designs. And so it was an opportunity, but at the end of all of this, it's really showed us the value of this long-term research and discovery efforts for the rest of the technology team and company, and emphasizes creating a process on product design and how a designer can be involved in that process. And then second, value of engaging users along the way. So again, we did this in our internal and external surveys, And moving forward, we'll be leveraging the expertise of our team in testing designs with clients. And then finally, the value of cross-functional collaboration. What a cliche, but our team has experts in SEL, experts in education. Some of them have been former educators and they work closely with educators. And so leveraging these resources, is so important, as well as our partnership with the teaching and learning team. And also having the tools to get it done. Just like a pro tip, we've been using a tool called Miro. Some of you might know it. It's been really wonderful. Great like collaborative tool. So a little extra nugget there. And that's it. So thank you all so much. Again, a lot of work to cram into a short period. I think I went a couple minutes over, but we are hiring designers and other positions at Panorama if you're interested in working with our team and being a part of all of this. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kelly. And maybe I'll ask folks if they have questions for you, Kelly, to just put them in chat and you can kind of answer as you go. We also will have the Q&A at the end. So plenty of opportunity still. Thanks so much. Stacy, I'm going to turn it over to you. Whenever you're ready, you can feel free to get started.
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it. I didn't realize we had such a great theme of research today. This is awesome. Alrighty. Let's get in presentation mode. Cool. Alrighty, so I'm going to share some insights from a study that we did recently around quality. And when I say quality, I mean quality online learning experiences. So first, who the hell am I? My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am currently the Senior Director of Experience at edX. We are also hiring. I'll drop links into the chat afterwards with our 3 roles that we've got open. I am a New Englander. I'm originally from Connecticut. I lived in Boston for a few years, and then now I live in Rhode Island. I write a bunch on LinkedIn and Medium. I also paint. I'm a geometric abstract painter. And I definitely spent the pandemic learning that I am a social artist, and I would rather make art for art fairs and talking about art with people, and not just so it will like lean against the wall and stick to itself just for the sake of making paintings. And then finally, I'm a huge lover of Psychology Today magazine. I read all kinds of weird nonfiction stuff in my spare time. I'm a runner. I love Lisa Frank and still try to dress like all of her art. And I adore high fives. To our previous presenter, I wanted to share this with you all. That whole idea of moving from Six Flags to Disney World is something that we talk about often in the edX experience team. So we have these 2 vision statements. One is about how we work. We say the quality of our work stems from diligently pursuing the highest impact customer problems through meaningful collaboration. And then the what we create vision statement is all about creating the #1 place where educators come to author and innovate, our L&D admins can retain or upskill their workforce, and learners can come to change their lives from their first to their 200th course. And that totally stems from a behind the scenes Disney show that I watched where one of the ride designers said, he's like, you don't design the ride for the first ride, you design it for the 20th. And that has stuck to me ever since. So let's get into it. Let's talk about quality. And for those who are, I also like how we're going up, right? We started with K through 8, now K through 12. Now we're talking adult higher ed. So we're hitting all the customer segments within education tonight. This is awesome. So what I'm going to share with you is actually focused around quality online learning experiences, but then also about how it relates to the need for instructor presence. And we'll talk about why I'm using air quotes and real quotes. So first, let me give you some background on the data I'm going to share with you. In late December of 2020, our Audience Insights Guild, I'll talk about that in a second, studied learner behaviors, the goals, and of course the frustrations under that focus of quality online learning experiences. This was learner specific, 12 interviews, typical in-depth interviews, qualitative IDIs over the course of 3 days. And as we often do in research, right, we started with a small sample doing deep exploratory and discovery-based research in order to inform a much higher volume quantitative study, which we ended up running with over 300 participants. So this Audience Insights Guild is something I spun up at edX, where we recognize that not all research has a home. And sometimes that research is spread across the organization. It doesn't have one department that it can or should live within. And so we created a home for it. And so anyone in the company can bring a research need to the guild. And then those folks who want to solve that problem or further understand that kind of research, they can also participate. They get hands-on learning experience themselves of running interviews, helping to organize them, taking notes, as well as doing the synthesis. So we sort of refer to ourselves as the cross-functional task force of insights. Okay. So what we ended up gleaning, we wanted to discover a bunch about like those mental models. When people think about quality online learning experiences, what are they thinking about? Like, how does it manifest? And the top 3 categories that came up in the interviews were timely feedback, clarity of content, and then content organization. So under timely feedback, we're talking about the interaction with the instructor or the TAs. That comes in the form of like live support, if there's office hours, also just timely feedback. As you would expect it to operate, right? You post something in the forum or you send your instructor an email and you get something quickly back. Clarity of content, just meaning that like it's easy to digest, it's easy to follow, you can easily understand it. And then content organization is really about the materials as well as the learning content itself. So if you're operating in a learning management system, is that content inside of the LMS actually easy to move through? Are there extra resources as well? Downloadable PDFs, can I find where those things are? Help me understand. And then bite-sized information that again helps people build towards that primary learning goal and outcome. So we also asked our participant, like, give me an example of what bad looks like and give me an example of what good looks like. So some highlights from this slide. I had an instructor who only read off from the slides and never answered any of my slide questions. We got some really old recorded material. It was very bad, very easy tests also. So rigor shows up, which is really interesting. Under the content relevance section, we heard a lot about, expectation setting, a lot of high level or, abstract theory, but not enough hands-on doing. And then examples being outdated or not relevant. And then finally, around learner expectations and pace, love this. The amount of work required is difficult to manage with full-time work and the associated time obligations. Just enough time to complete the course requirements, assigned reading and labs. Probably should have paced myself by taking the certificate courses over a longer period of time. So like, how can we help meet learners where they are is one of the great themes from this research. So what does great online learning experiences look like? So I was able to try what I learned with my patient-centered care and reduce missed opportunities to add, positive impact each time a patient came in. There was helpful exercises after each lesson, and the feedback was fast. I was able to accelerate my career and land a dream job. Those are always the quotes we want to hear, right? The lectures were clear. They were interesting. The schedule was flexible enough that I never needed to disrupt my plans and finish an assignment. What a great other side of the coin to that last quote we heard on the bad examples. Hands-on demos, really helping to develop that intuition. Lots of practical examples. You could understand how passionate the instructor was, and that it's halfway to that it's easy to motivate the students in addition to providing that significant amount of support material. So the materials show up again. So we also wanted to ask, we gave a list of categories and we said, all right, out of these, while you were experiencing all that goodness, which of the following actually did you experience? And the thing that people experienced the most during a positive learning experience was that organized content or materials. Next was good video quality, and third was effective instructors. But to do a little deeper dive on that, you can look at the list on the left. Variety of learning activities shows up. Those additional materials and resources, easy to apply that material to my job or life, and then communication style was right for me from the instructor. Some other responses on the edge ended up talking about ample time to complete, support from instructors, timely feedback, and then feeling the connection of other students in the course. Then we also asked, which of these had the biggest impact on your experience overall? Organized content or materials showed up yet again. Next in line was easy to apply to my job or life, and then effective instructors fell in also in those top 3. The smallest impact on the learner experiences that we gleaned from these interviews included communication style, timely feedback, and support from instructors. So it was interesting. We started to see this delta between what people answered when we asked the question, what does quality online learning experiences mean to you, versus when you experienced it, what did you notice the most? What actually made a difference for you? So in the end, what should you take away from all this goodness? Honestly, when learners get what they need and we meet them where they are, especially when they get what they need from course materials, those recap emails also, we heard a lot of that, and other low touch information sources, their need for that high touch instructor presence is much lower. So we created this sort of pyramid of needs on the right-hand side. So at the very base is, I need a white paper, an article, a downloadable PDF, whatever that additional course material is, I need to find it easily. I need to be able to reference it when I want to. Next is, I need help managing my time and effort. So this could be coaching services. This would be coaching from the platform. Think of, the Apple Watch for education in that way. And then at the very top is that I need one-on-one assistance. This is where office hours or specific Q&A or just time directly with the instructor to further understand. So at the end of this, what was really interesting to us from this one section of this larger study is that instructor presence doesn't necessarily mean you have to physically be interacting with learners. To some of the previous 2 speakers that we've heard tonight, right? It's not necessarily a one size fits all, but if we do a great job as educators by meeting those base level needs and making those materials easy to access and easy to digest, we can do a better job at reducing that need for high level assistance. And a lot of it, hopefully, our platforms can handle. And that's it. That's all I have for you tonight. So thank you so much. We are on the experience team looking to hire 3 roles right now. I've got job descriptions up and running for our product design manager, which involves our learner end-to-end experience. That includes our design system. So you have some goodness there. We're looking for a product design contractor, and then we're also looking for a UX writer contractor. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stacy. And so I'm going to let folks start asking any questions they might have into the chat. I'm going to give just a couple seconds if folks have a question. If not, I can ask one too. Always after these, I always have a lot of questions. So thank you again. But I'll give the priority to the audience members first if any come up. Okay, I'll get started quickly while folks might still be thinking. One thing I always think about is kind of when you kind of do the surveys, cut across like different types of learners in terms of where they are, right? So there might be, when I think of MOOC, often think of like, college graduates, and they might be one type of students, and there might be other types of students who maybe haven't gone to college or maybe are international where the education system is different, right? Is the process for gathering insight from that different, or is it very, what does that look like?
It's important to be intentional about gathering those cross-sectional insights. We have found it to be more challenging to get international participants. We've got a lot of great recruiters that focus on the US, but it's been really, really expensive to have a third party help us get organized with our international audience. So we've done some of that lifting manually ourselves, but I will say this data in particular was US based only. In terms of different learners, like where they are within their lives, you mentioned, are they college graduates? Are they, bachelor's people? Have they already gotten their master's? Are they just learning for fun? We usually will ask those questions during the pre-qualifying surveys. So the things that, you ask at the front to try and figure out whether a participant is actually right for the study. And we do look at that primarily because we have segments that we developed and we rebranded, which are around, so we have career climbers who are our MicroMasters, and like, you know what you want, you know what you need in order to make that career pivot. We have path hackers who are actually looking for more guidance and typically have less extended higher education, so not so much on the master's side, may have an associate's or a bachelor's. And also may have not gotten their bachelor's, may have never done undergrad, may have started and stopped. And then finally, we have just knowledge seekers. They are looking to learn for fun. So often when we run these studies, we are also looking at, which of the participants correlate with that, and is there any data or basically like future need to run a study that's only focusing on people that qualify as our definition of path hacker, for example. But for this study in particular, it was broad. We tried to create a mix and a blend as well. And then took a look at the data from there. But yeah, it's always good to make sure you don't muddy your results as much as possible.
Awesome, thanks. I know Lauren has a question. We'll leave that, I'll ask that in the Q&A first because it's for everyone. I think the second question coming in is about comments about students' external environments or circumstances. I guess not necessarily about the platform itself, but kind of about things outside of that.
Oh, let me read this.
Yeah, sorry.
Study with our students when they're focused online. Right, structure seeking. Yeah, time management is huge. Structuring their environment. Yes, so we definitely saw comments, and it really depended on where people were in their life. If their lives were extremely busy and maxed out, we definitely heard more about time management, or even that one quote that I read to you from the what bad looks like. Is the course actually flexible? How do I know if I can actually make it work for me, is often a question that we hear. I will say what's interesting, and one of the things I've been rolling around in my head about writing as a content piece on LinkedIn and Medium, is about how we are all translators at heart. And one of the things that I spent some time doing, I think it was November of 2020, I actually attended the national or the international ADHD conference. So blending that lens of psychology and customer research together was fascinating. But what was eye-opening was that if we solve for if we solve for things like ADHD challenges, we will actually maximize features and time management capabilities. If we had Pomodoro timers that were built in, for example, if we showed how or suggested how people can chunk apart the learning and the modules, we could actually help not only the average learner, we could help people that have different cognitive abilities, and then we could help people that also didn't know that they could break the rules and not learn in a linear fashion, for example. So we do hear it. We haven't yet run any specific studies that correlate with that just yet.
Awesome, thanks. And that's time. So I'm actually going to invite both Kelly and Stacey to come up, and now we're going to open it up to Q&A for anything UX related. So certainly maybe some of the topics in the talk inspired some questions. Feel free to continue asking those, but we're also opening it to kind of just UX, EdTech in general, as this is kind of where our talk is kind of at the intersection of both. So I'll start with Lorraine's question, which is about how do you all research for accessibility, or where does that come in into the research process? So not talked about specifically, but maybe y'all could talk to that a little bit. And Stacey, I don't know, since you're here, we can start first, and then Kelly, if you want to chime in, go for it.
Sure. Accessibility is something we care about enough that we've got a dedicated accessibility specialist who is on our team. And we have run very specific accessibility studies. Again, it goes back to not muddying the data and not muddying your study goals. So when we run those specific studies around accessibility, it's usually with that focus. And then also at the same time, so this was obviously like conversational, right? We're trying to understand mental models, we're trying to understand beliefs and philosophies and experiences, as opposed to use this prototype, poke this thing, touch that thing, tap this thing, click here. When we do those interactive usability and user studies that are testing prototypes, we absolutely test for accessibility as well. Just trying to keep an eye on, we're testing for color blindness, we're asking questions, we're monitoring things like that for sure.
Yeah, and I'll add, so we also at Panorama have just recently hired a specialist in accessibility, which is really exciting. So for anyone who's looking for a niche, I know there's a lot of people on here who are new, like boot campers in this space. Like accessibility, I think is gonna continue to grow, and businesses are gonna more and more see that not just the value from like a business standpoint, but the necessity of having someone who is really focused in accessibility. And so really excited. She just started. So we don't have probably the processes that we hope to, and that Stacy probably has in place today. But as far as like, we have someone who now is able to, from a like really clear accessibility lens, be able to take a look at our current product and do an audit, as well as look at, as we do design reviews and upcoming designs, have that really clear focus. And then, you know, with accessibility, it's also a really collaborative process with engineers as well. And so design is sort of half the battle, and engineering and design like coming together is really what's going to make the difference. So when it comes to research, it's not just research in with our users and researching with a specific accessibility frame of mind and lens, but it's also pulling in engineers as early as possible to have those conversations and make sure that from the technical standpoint, things are being addressed as well.
Plus 1,000 to that. Yeah. Our accessibility specialist runs his own office hours. He participates in front end study group, which is where all the front end engineers get together and talk about front end. He attends our design system open office hours, and where we talk about, you know, new components and how to iterate. And then he's also obviously in all of our design reviews, but he's also involved in our strategy conversation. So we have 2 managers, hopefully 3 coming soon with this new rec that's open. And every other week we have experienced team leadership meetings that are focused on the product strategy in particular, talking about what's going on across the organization, but then also bringing in those different perspectives, because our product lines are so different. We've got enterprise, we have learners, and we've got our partner facing tools. And then we have our Open edX, which is entire, you know, open source backend platform.
Awesome, great. I'm going to try to break down this next question a little bit. It's about kind of the team task force and how is it cross-functional. So I know we talked about a lot of collaboration already. So maybe just a little bit more information about the teams and how they're cross-functional and what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So the guild is 100% cross-functional. And what I mean by cross-functional, I mean, it's typically myself and 1 or 2 other designers or researchers leading the charge in terms of offering up that product design or UX research expertise. And then it's when we were running these quality studies, we were partnering primarily with our learning team. So we have, you know, instructional designers, our VP of learning is a part of the conversation, but also our program management. So our folks that are currently solving for and developing new ways for us to deliver our degree programs. So it's a really interesting way to bring different teams across the organization together. And then we open it up. We pop it on our major Slack channels and say, hey, everybody, we're running customer interviews. If you'd like to observe, we've got a sign up sheet where people can just send themselves, you know, a calendar invite, drop the Zoom link into their calendar invite and attend and just watch the interviews.
Awesome. And then, Kelly, I'm going to turn to you in a moment. Stacy, how big is edX right now? I'm just getting a size of, want to get a size of the organization to see how.
Yeah, 250 people is how big edX is right now.
Got it. Awesome. And then Kelly, how about Panorama?
As far as size,
yeah,
Panorama is about maybe 175. We are rapidly growing, so it's hard for me to keep track.
Sure. Awesome. And then do you see something similar in terms of how cross-functional your teams, is it look kind of similar or is it a little bit different?
I mean, as far as like having cross-functional teams in general, absolutely. It's sort of like baked into our process. And so as an example, our day-to-day teams make up design, engineer, and product, but we also have a dedicated research team. And I don't mean research as in user research or UX research, but I mean research as in research from like a education data standpoint. So they're looking at attendance, behavior, coursework data across schools, and thinking about how we use that to drive impact when showing data reports to school districts. But then we also work really closely with our client success teams and support teams, our, like I said, teaching and learning team. We use Slack as a tool for constant communication. So yes to all of the above.
Awesome. And Kelly, I'll stick with you a little bit for the next one. So Maria's second part is about channels of customer feedback. So maybe start with what are the channels of customer feedback? And then is there one in particular that you find the most helpful?
Great question. So this is something we are, currently and constantly talking about how to streamline this. I think we've grown recently from a small, EdTech startup to what's now turning into sort of a mid-sized startup. And so our processes that worked when we were smaller, we're finding, like, of course, naturally aren't working quite as well as we're beginning to grow and we have more clients. So we're talking about it a lot. So just to quickly answer the question, most of our client feedback comes through our client success team. So essentially, when one of our client success managers or our account directors who work really closely with our main points of contacts at a school district, when they hear feedback, they will submit it to us through a system. We use a Trello board as a system where people can create cards, and we can use those to essentially collect feedback in one place, organize them by columns, have people within the company vote on cards so that we on the product side have a sense of prioritization when it comes to the feedback that we have coming in. And we also flag all of our product feedback for things that we consider to be equity concerns. So is there a piece of feedback that is directly impacting a student's experience from an equitable lens? Are we creating an inequitable experience in our product for some reason? So those kinds of things that we want to make sure are elevated and go through a completely separate and more timely review process. So we use that system right now, and we're right now figuring out, okay, now that we have this way of collecting feedback as we begin to grow, how do we more, like, in a more streamlined way, make sure that we are impacting our product roadmap with that feedback? So it's there's a lot of things I think about. We have played around with having like direct in-product feedback channels, so a link to a form or something like that, and we've only sort of dabbled in that area. So I can't speak too much to it, though I think that there's a really strong case for that, so that we're cutting out sort of the middle person of relaying feedback from the client to us, but we haven't explored it quite as much as we could yet. So yeah, we organize our feedback in a Trello board, and it comes from our client success team who's fielding it from our users.
Awesome, thanks. And what's that look like at edX, Stacy?
Can you repeat the initial question?
Yes, absolutely. So it's about what channels do you have for customer feedback? And then is there one in particular that you really like or have found value in, maybe?
This could be a whole separate talk. Let's see. So customers at edX are at least 3 different kinds, as I mentioned before. We've got learners, we've got enterprises. Inside of enterprises, we have buyers, we have L&D admins. There's all sorts of things inside there. And then we have our partners, our institutional. These are where our instructors are coming from, the course teams. They're the universities that are building the content. For learners, obviously we have ad hoc research. we have course end surveys. We have, why am I drawing a blank? We also have data that comes through in learner support. So we have a learner support team and a partner support team. So we have internally we use Confluence primarily as like our knowledge management center. And so we actually have what's called a customer insights hub. You as an employee at edX can grab templates to run your own study. You can check out the latest data from any studies we've run in the past. And then also we have a link where we've partnered with our support teams to post updates on quarterly learner support, as well as learner NPS and partner NPS data. So net promoter score, how likely are you to recommend edX to a friend or a family member is the question on a scale of 1 to 10. And so we monitor that. On the partner side, I've actually been working directly with our customer and partner success team, CPS. So they are obviously partner facing, our partner managers, but we have a multitude of measurement tools over there. And it's everything from partner NPS, same thing there. They have their own course end surveys as well, where they get to respond and tell us as instructors, like what's working and what's not. And then we also obviously have partner support, but then we have ad hoc research, and then some annual surveys as well. In addition to this, what dawned on me at the turn of the year was we have all of this ad hoc stuff, as well as all of these sort of rinse and repeatable measurement functions. Should we? Yes, we should take a look at across them and try and glean themes and patterns from them. So one of our incredible product managers ended up creating a gap analysis. So what he does is he looks at over 180 parts of our platform and asks our partners, are we on track? Are we behind? Or are we ahead of where you think we should be with that feature? And so in partnering with Marco, he and I took that gap analysis data, compared it with themes that we heard in the quality studies, in NPS, in those course end surveys, and really was able to bubble up major themes to say, okay, from a product strategy standpoint, these are some of the core areas that we probably want to focus on. And here's how we want to think about influencing. At this time, at least this year, it was much more about our partner-facing course authoring tools. We had spent 2020 really getting to know the learners and developing a lot of insights around them. And while we didn't give up on them and leave them alone, we recognized that we had a great opportunity to take a look at all of those course authoring tools and figure out, like, how do we influence the strategy? So yeah, there's all kinds of different creative ways that you can look across data sets and just ask that question of, like, what's common here? What are we seeing that people keep talking about over the course of a year's worth of data?
Awesome, thanks. I got 3 more questions in about 8 minutes or so. So I'm gonna ask one for Kelly, one specific Kelly, one specific Stacy, and then one is for you both. So Kelly, the question being asked for you is, do you view the SEL implementation evaluation model you use as a replacement for the standard heuristic evaluation methodology? And sorry, I forget I don't know the standard one, if there is one, but yeah, go for it.
Well, I saw in Allison's question, they mentioned standard heuristic evaluation methodology. So I'm going to try and do my best to answer this. And Allison, if I don't quite get to the question as you're asking it, please feel free to chime in the chat. So when I think about the heuristic evaluation methodology, I think of that as a tool that we could use in addition to the process that we've been going through as far as evaluating the SEL implementation cycle as we've laid it out. I don't think that they are replacements for each other, but rather like another tool that we can use. So again, when we're thinking about the heuristic evaluation, we would be looking at our cycle and looking at the model that we've laid out and thinking about, how does this match between the real world and how we've laid it out? How do we think about, users being able to go through the system and recover from errors, and the flexibility and the efficiency of its use and everything. So again, to me, they don't seem to be like in tension with each other, but rather a really helpful, another model to help us test out whether or not we've hit the mark. So I appreciate it, like bringing it up as like something to loop in to the process that we're doing.
Awesome, thanks. And Allison, feel free to put in chat if you'd like to follow up. Stacy, if you're back, Judith has a question about, I guess she sees a lot of learners who don't read any materials. So in terms of hands-on learning, the context, and use support as their first go-to. I guess, have you seen this is the first part of the question. Oh, Stacy, you're on mute, I think.
Thank you.
Yep.
There's always learners and customers who will just give up and go to support. And I would say I can't make any broad statements because like we said already, right? It's not a one size fits all response. Because we have a global audience with our learner population at edX, sometimes it is that English is not their first language and they're having difficulty understanding the instructions. Sometimes it's a lack of tech savviness, or that there's actually a bug that's happening in the platform. There's a lot of different things that can happen. And then also it can also be anxiety, right? Like, it's the first time you're taking an online course, you're trying to do something new and you want it to go well, but nothing's making sense, and the nerves and the anxiety is sort of getting in the way of that cognition. So I don't have a great answer other than to say that there are so many contributing factors that make people give up and go to support instead. But it is a worthwhile analysis, either from the notes in those support tickets or even doing a study off of it to try and understand, like, why are people giving up and going to support first.
Awesome, thanks. And the last question is from Roya, and it's a good one to conclude on. It's really about kind of the intersection of UX and EdTech. So Roya says she'd love to hear more about the overlap between UX research and any internal academic or efficacy research happening. What have you all found to be a successful intersection or balance in terms of UX research and figuring out what is truly impacting learning?
Yeah, this is something the VP of Learning and I have been talking about a ton, and it's actually like a wish that we want to pursue even much more so. I'd say these quality studies that we spun up at the end of 2020 and into really the first 3 or 4 months of this year has led us to that path of asking, how might we fully understand learning outcomes? Because learners have such different, especially in higher education, and especially with MOOCs. We know that learners don't necessarily learn in a linear fashion. They will hop around depending on like what they have the brain space for. I've been taking a certificate program with Cornell for the last few months, for example, and even I finally got an understanding of like what the heck that actually means. It's like, well, I know I have time to take all the quizzes. Let me see if I can take all the quizzes and just get them done, because I know that that's a graded part and a required part of the course. And then when I'm in reading mode and I have time, I'll sit down and I'll do all the reading and just make sure I understand the concepts. So there is a massive opportunity to have an intersection between user research and, learning outcome studies overall. I would say there's probably, I feel like, this is my personal opinion, I don't feel like there's enough happening out in EdTech yet to help us link between the philosophy and the beliefs around pedagogy and actually what is happening from a learner outcome. And one last example I'll say to that, something that we often talk about at edX is like, yes, we measure completion rate, but does completion mean cognition and that learning has happened? Learning outcomes differ so much to different personas, to different segments of the population, to their different needs and where they are in their life and what the learning they're hoping it does for them, but also what they didn't expect for it to do for them. So it's complex, but it's beautifully complex. And I want to chase it with all of you.
Awesome. Thanks. Go for it, Kelly.
Just to add quickly to that, not to completely repeat this is a complex question with a complex answer. Because, when we talk also about learning outcomes, as Stacy mentioned, even that in the K-12 space, for example, there's a lot of conversation and debate around what does that even mean? What are we measuring? What is the goal? Is it graduation rate? Is it some other measurement? So we even as a society can sometimes disagree on what successful learning looks like. There are some huge proponents of standardized testing, and then there are some just as stark arguments against it. And so the fact that even that is hard to measure complicates things. At Panorama, we are lucky to sit on a huge national data set of student data in the K-12 space that includes student attendance, student academics, student behavior, and student social emotional learning measurements. And again, it just complicates it because, first of all, that kind of academic data across, when you're in the K-12 space, at least across a national data set, doesn't necessarily play nicely with each other because states have different standards, things are measured in different ways. And again, it also like goes back to like, what are we really measuring here? You know, students who have strong coursework scores, but are struggling in other areas such as attendance or behavior or social emotional learning, you know, how do we like measure what's impacting learning in good ways? So it's really a complicated like area. But the key for us is working with specific districts, understanding what their goals are at their district and in their community, and helping them achieve those in a more sort of like individualized community lens. So
to that point, Kelly, I feel like what you just described is like the funnel is so wide in terms of all of the different slices and variations of, for you, it's state regulations, which I worked in insurance for a while, and like, goodness gracious, I understand the pain of, you know, state differences that relegate different requirements, right? But, and then for us, it's around, you know, where are you in your life? What are you hoping to get out of this? What did you actually get out of it? Why are you even taking the course, and what does a good outcome mean to you? It'll take a while. Like, this is a year's worth of work in my mind. It's like, how do we got to isolate like what segment of the population we want to focus on, and then start by asking those like big, broad questions, narrow it again, double diamond, incredible framework, pick your framework. You know what I'm saying?